Carolyn Davis, it's a pleasure to have you in the studio.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you.
I know that there was this, some are calling it a protest and a counter-protest. There were a lot of people who showed up. This was an official event somehow, somewhere. People said it was about the children. And there were a lot of children there at this event in Parade Square. You were there. Tell me a little bit about what that was like for you.
Well, I met with a group of anti-trans people who were outside of the legislative buildings, and we didn't see the others until they made their march down there. I was taken aback, really, at how many there were, but I was also emboldened by the fact that we outnumbered them by a great, great deal, and that made me feel good that, you know, enough people get it, that, you know, this isn't about anything that's going to harm children. And I don't know where that narrative really comes from. I mean, it was the same narrative they used with homosexuals. I mean, I watched an episode of Barney Miller just the other day.
Okay.
And they had this call, and the chief inspector had to come in and find out, you know, wait a minute, we had somebody identify themselves as gay, and I'd like to talk to them. Because, of course, they're going to have to go under a psych eval and everything else. And they're talking about how devastating this would be for that person's career. Now, this is the 1970s.
Right.
Well, the gay movement's come a long way. And, you know, the trans movement was really getting there. I mean, there are a lot of trans people in Canada, and there always have been. The problem has been we've always been afraid, and sometimes for very good reasons. You know, there are people that just don't like the fact that we exist. But what bothered me the most was, you know, they're saying, oh, what are you doing to the children? Are you guys predators? What's happening with this? I'm thinking, I have nothing to do with children. I'm a comedian. I do adult shows for adults. What, you know, when people coming up to me saying, "Oh my God," and I'm like, and it dawned on me. I said, "Yeah, you aren't worried that I'm going to touch your children or anything, because that's not happening. You know, you don't see in the news, oh my God, trans people are doing these atrocities. No, you're not. What you're hearing about is them being beaten and murdered and everything else around the world, but you rarely hear about us doing an awful lot of horrible things. So why is it they're afraid of us? What do they think we're going to do to the children?" And it comes down to the fear of us, of our own visibility. They don't want their children to look at us and go, hey, that's a valid option. That person is as deserving of rights as anyone else. You know, they would rather look at us in shame and derision and say, no, there's something wrong with these people. They're mentally ill, they're unstable, you know, and of course they'll drop the big P word all the time, like they did for gays in the past of pedophile. And it's like, well, no, none of this is happening. It's a fear that, you know, their child is going to come to them and say, hey, Mom or Dad, I think I might be trans. This was really brought home to me yesterday during the march, where as the march was winding down, there was a group that was kind of rounding the corner of legislative buildings. I was trying to catch up with my friends, and I found myself kind of surrounded by the enemy. And they were yelling at this couple of trans people that were there, and saying some pretty hateful things, and especially about children. And I said, it sounds to me like you'd rather have a dead child than a trans child. They said, you're absolutely right. Better dead than trans. And then the sixth one, better dead than trans, better dead than trans. I'm like, you're loving parents. You care so much. You just assume your child be dead, then try to accept what makes them happy. What's going to help them to grow to be the person that they can be. Trans people give back to society. Oh my God, a good friend of mine from Victoria is studying, and she has her PhD, and she's working on cancer research. You know, another friend of mine, to dispel another myth, was in the airborne regiment and has transitioned to be female. I mean, you look at the myths and stereotypes around trans people, it doesn't match reality at all. So where is this coming from? Where is this fear of our existence coming from? We're not bothered. We just want to exist. We just want the same rights as everybody else. We just want to live our lives happily without fear. You know, and it'd be a real good thing too if I could go to the bathroom. You know, I used to say in my stand-up act, I would say, well, you know, I don't visit the States anymore because I have to travel through 3 states before I can legally pee. You know, how do you get people out of society? What's a great way to get them out of the public eye? Don't let them use the bathroom. That's a really great way because, you know, as the hate rises against trans people, do I want to walk into the men's bathroom? No. I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable there to begin with. But would I feel safe? Not by a long shot. It's just a very bad situation that's getting altogether worse.
You touched on the language is so important. You said the enemy, and we hear this called a culture war.
Yeah.
And when we have people who show up who say on one hand, well, this is about the parents having a right to know. And if you look at the New Brunswick example or the Saskatchewan example where it is, you know, fundamental.
Or the Florida example.
Or Florida, where parents, I don't think there's any parent who wouldn't want to know, but I think the challenge is with Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is that after you're 16, you don't have to have your parents' permission. So I think it's a parental consent that has some people that feel well, you saw the signs.
Absolutely.
I belong to my parents.
Yeah.
Children who are positioned to be seen as possessions of their parents, and the language that says that gets us so far away from, I think, what I feel should be happening. That's this change that's happened is helping people understand where they're coming from, where they're going, and the acceptance of being a valuable person in community. And
you hit on a couple of things there. Now, as soon as I said the word enemy, I really regretted that because we're all just people, okay? It's all just a matter of education. And when people say they want to take these things out of the education system, well, then you're just propagating these myths. You're just propagating these biases, this bigotry that's happening out there. You know, but the more people know, the more they can understand and make their own decisions in life. Now, you talk about kids and how, oh, the parents want to know. Does any of this inspire a child to come out to their parents who just marched in a march like this to say, oh, by the way, Mom or Dad, I know you said you'd rather have a dead child than a trans child, but can I talk to you because I think I might be trans? No, put the knife down. I mean, that's a terrible situation to be in.
Yeah.
I mean, for a young child, I know it. I mean, I grew up in a rather rough neighborhood when I was a kid. I was fat, effeminate, slow, and I had no bigger brothers. So I was a target. I got beaten up on a regular basis. I would get called a lot of homosexual slurs. Even though I wasn't attracted to boys whatsoever, it didn't matter. They saw my feminine characteristics and said, you're not quite like us. And all the whole time I'm thinking, you know, I'm really not. I mean, I just thought it was because I was smarter, but it was more than that. It was, you know, the fact that, yes, I am different inside. But I struggled with this. I fought it. I had major depression. I was suicidal, you know, because I hated myself so much. Everything I could possibly do to not be trans, to be in the straight and narrow. I was a man's man. There was a time I thought I was a man. Now, it was just a phase. But I mean, I thought that maybe I am a man. So I joined a fraternity. I became their president. I was on the student council. I was a bouncer at bars. You know, and I would reply to people with stereotypical remarks, you know, and drink my beer and fart a lot. And it wasn't me, you know. I don't think I was ever a mean person. I certainly was never a violent person. But I'd soon learned that if you don't at least have the appearance of being violent, or the appearance that you will at least defend yourself, then you're going to be victimized.
And I think you touched on something that might have been missing from the day on Wednesday, which was that the education isn't just for the parents or the teachers or even the peers, but for these kids who are not sure. How might your life how do you think it would have been different if there had been a supportive network, that it would have been socially acceptable, that it might not have pushed you into a path that at the time was what caused you to want to not be alive? That's pretty serious.
When you realize that you're living a lie, you can't, in your own mind, you can never be yourself. And the whole of society is telling you that if you're yourself, then you're just terrible. You know, that sort of messaging gets into a person's head after a while. Now, there are different studies and everything that show that, you know, because, let me stop there for a second. A lot of times people will say, oh, well, trans people, they're just crazy. You know, it's in the diagnostic manual there, you know, gender dysphoria, it's right there. You're a bunch of crazies. Why should we listen to you? And it's like, well, the truth of the matter is a lot of us suffer from depression and anxiety, and the truth, the further truth to that is that isn't because we're trans. That is because of fear and oppression. That is because of physical violence. That is because of seeing our friends harmed and knowing that that threat is very real. You know, up until a few years ago, I mean, when the Parliament tried to pass a new statute in the human rights legislation protecting trans people, I mean, it passed the House just fine, but then it was shut down in the Senate, stonewalled until it would just run out. It took finally the Liberals to come into power and to put that into place, which I think is marvelous. Now, all I hear is people trying to undo this. I mean, in the United States, for example, you take Florida, for example, a lot of the worst laws against trans people come from Florida, including things like, you know, you can only go to the bathroom of the gender that you were assigned at birth. You can, you know, if you're imprisoned, you're going to go to the prison of the gender you were assigned at birth and everything else, which might as well be a death sentence right there. And now I'm hearing the same rhetoric come from the Conservative Party at their last big convention. And an overwhelming majority voted for this. Now, according to, and I believe it might have even been in the Chronicle Herald, I'm not sure, but it was in one of the publications I read that they were given very limited time to argue with this before they were shut down. So they didn't really even want to hear the truth at this. Now people say, oh, well, there's going to be an election and things. And to me, it's like, I've given up caring what their policies are economically. You know, it's a fight for survival. You know, what's going to be next? I never thought that a political party, a federal party in Canada, could come out with policies like this. You know, and this is naive of me. All humans are the same. We're all the same deep down. You know, so Floridians, Canadians, however you like. But I thought we might have been better than that. I thought we cared about diversity in Canada. I thought we cared about inclusion in Canada. I think those are very important qualities that as Canadians that we should embrace. We shouldn't be afraid of diversity. We should embrace it, especially if no one's getting harmed. We don't have to make up a mythical boogeyman. There's all kinds of ills that are out there that we can tackle. Let's tackle those problems. Let's not create ones that don't exist.
I think the dialogue is the most important, the conversation.
Absolutely.
To get to know someone who either doesn't look like you or who you feel is totally different than either your upbringing, your beliefs, or your society. But to go back to that protest, as you say, the counter-protest, or the people who were there to show love and support, even they were they were upset, they were angry because of what they were seeing and hearing. So is this a blip? We can't ignore what happened? Where do we, and I'm not asking you for the solution, I'm asking for your perspective. Where do you see this going, this quote-unquote culture war?
Well, for one, we have to recognize that this did not originate here in Halifax. This was part of an operation that went right across the country, you know, the 1 million person march or what have you. And in each of those marches, many, many, many more supporters of trans people came out than those that vilified them. I think that speaks volumes. You know, education is everything. As you said, dialogue is everything. And if one side will not listen to the other no matter what they say, and there's that wall thrown up, well, there's nowhere you can go with that. You know, the biggest impediment to social progress is when two sides both speak the truth. If one side said it's important to protect children, I can't argue with that.
It's hard to.
That's poignant. That's you know, I totally agree with that. Another group says, you know, our rights are important. We should not lose our basic human rights. That's why they're called basic human rights. We all should have these rights. Yeah. So, you know, where does that come from until we break down that narrative? Then we say, okay, you know, in what way are we a threat to your children? Can you explain this more? You know, without saying the what ifs. And as well, and that extrapolates into the fact that, you know, of women's spaces. You know, what threat am I to a woman when I go into a washroom that any cisgender male isn't? The only difference between me being in a female washroom and a cisgender man walking in who may want to harm these people is I'm trans and I used to be a bouncer. They're way safer if I'm there.
We could go on, and we can go on, but I think we've touched on some of what I think you wanted to talk about and discuss.
Absolutely.
And I will implore people to go see you in a comedy setting, just to know that as human beings, we are complex. We have many different sides and aspects, and for you to want to enlighten us and to talk to us, I really do appreciate that, Carolyn.
Well, thank you very much, Sheldon. I appreciate this opportunity as well.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you.